everybody. It's a very big pleasure to be here in presence. We did this award also last year in Web Summit, but was online. So we are back to normal, more or less, or we try to do that. Euroconsumer is the world's leading consumer group made of 5 national organizations. We are in Spain, in Portugal, in Belgium, in Italy, and in Brazil. And I take the chance, and we represent altogether 1,500,000 consumers. So I feel also this responsibility or represent their voice. And I take the chance also to say hello to all our employees in these countries. And some of them, they are following us. 4 years ago, we launched this initiative, My Data is Mine. And I think this we saw in a good direction, because today data is very important for economic growth, job creation, and also to improve our society at large. But this should be done respecting consumer rights, because when I say my data is mine, it means that we are contributing to improve our society with our data. We insert our data in something that is bigger than us. It's not only for our interest, but is for the interest of everybody. So we launched this initiative 4 years ago, and that's why last year we launched also this award, challenging young researchers all around the world, not only in our 5 countries, to produce essays, innovative essays, elaborating in the concept of balancing the privacy as a fundamental right, but also the economic value of data. So the innovative part of this challenge, of this award, is that those essays should really balance these 2 things in order to contribute to a framework, an environment that is a regulatory and digital environment that could exploit the benefit for the society in a correct way using data. So that's the challenge that this second year we are going to have the finalists here, and I ask the finalists to come in. So, as I said, this is the challenge that we had, but we wanted to have the academy and the young researchers to help us on figure out how we can balance the economic value of data and the fundamental right of privacy. And I'm very happy to have the finalists. These 2 essays. One essay has been written in 4 hands, and is Giovanni Di Gregorio, is a postdoctoral research at University of Oxford, and Pietro Dun, PhD student at Bologna University. This is one finalist together, and here we have instead, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing well, is Mashi Soku from Cyprus. She's an LLM, she studied in Tilburg, and she produced the other essays. This is our finalist. But as in each award, we have finalists, and we are going to announce very soon if I stop speaking, because they told me I don't have to speak too much. But we have also a jury. So I ask Els Brueggemann of my team, of Euroconsumer Public Affairs, please Els come in, and Marco Cialdone. Please.
No, I think that you have to announce me.
Marco?
Yeah. Yeah.
So now we have the finalists, we have the jury, and probably I can shut up. I want just to recall that My Data is Mine is not a protectionist claim. My data's mind means that the way of thinking about this new framework should be created by all of us because we contribute with our data to the society of tomorrow, of today as well. So this is a call just to be altruist. It's not only for our own, but is also for the future of our society. There should be balance. And so I will ask first, the first finalist, Maki, to briefly describe, much better than what I did, on how you contribute in this challenge with your essay, and then afterward, the second essay. Please, Maki.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity. I'm really grateful to be here and be able to walk you through what I wrote. So the claim that I made is that when regulating artificial intelligence, we shouldn't only look at risk-based approaches or technology neutrality, but instead we should approach the issue from a human rights perspective. And it's a bold claim, so let's start detangling this a bit. Technology neutrality implies that the same regulatory principles apply regardless of the technology that is being used. And a really successful example of this is the GDPR. In the case of artificial intelligence, technology neutrality can actually be pretty beneficial because it corresponds to the broad nature of AI as a discipline, and it also allows to create future-proof legislation that will accordingly protect individuals and consumers. But this is not where things should end. On the contrary, I argue that we should even enrich this approach with a human rights perspective. And why this is because for the first time ever, a technological phenomenon challenges human rights so gravely. It can take decisions for us, either favorable or not, and it can reinforce bias against us. It can also invade the most private parts of our lives. And just to put this a bit into practical context, I use the EU Draft AI Act, which is currently based on a risk-based approach, which means that it classifies AI systems according to the risk that they possess. And in practice, this is not so beneficial for us individuals and consumers because it allows for the people that want to launch a brand new sparkly AI product or system to be able to classify the risk of their system on their own. So what would change really if we were to take the AI Act as it is now and implement a human rights approach in it? Well, many things, but some examples would be the complete ban on automated weapons, the ban of mass surveillance based on biometric data as it already exists in the GDPR. And lastly, it would involve more organizations and human rights organizations into the oversight and redress mechanisms. So having said all of this, what should be taken away from my speech today is that AI challenges human rights so gravely that to regulate with anything else but fundamental rights at hand would be too short-sighted. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maci. And now we are going to listen instead what is in it in the other finalist paper by Giovanni and Pietro.
Yeah, so thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. And just to tell you a story why we decided to write this essay, actually, it's also because when we look at the evolution of European digital policies nowadays, we look a lot about fragmentation of different approaches. Think about that users in the EU are not just, of course, data subjects for data protection, are not just content providers for the relevance of online intermediate reliability, but they are even, of course, users for sure, consumers, and are even citizens. So, and this has led us to think about how the change in the fragmentation of European digital policy is affecting profiling that actually touches upon all the relevant aspects of how users behave in our digital society. And so the question was about what are the steps the European Union is taking and And the question is about the coherence of this approach, looking at different pieces of European digital policy. And the answer, actually, we try to look at the famous General Data Protection Regulation, and on the other hand, at the Digital Services Act, to look at how the risk-based approach in the European Union framework is really becoming a proxy and a parameter to balance the need to innovate in the internal market on the one hand, and on the other hand, to balance the fundamental rights we already mentioned at this stage. So now I will just leave the floor, of course, to Pietro, and then probably we can come up and discuss about the output of the work. Please.
Okay, so as Giovanni has already mentioned, we highlighted that profiling, the regulation of profiling is generally based on adopting a risk-based approach. Now, what is a risk-based approach? Basically, what the European Union does is allow data controllers to put in place practices such as automated decision-making and profiling. The GDPR provides some restrictions on these practices, but they are quite fuzzy usually. So what happens is that the choice is to say, okay, you data controller can do these things, you can use profiling, but you have to put in place some measures to counteract the risks posed to human rights, such as data privacy, non-discrimination, and so on and so forth. Now, this risk-based approach, however, has been declined in various ways. So the GDPR, for instance, takes a very top-down approach. In general, data controllers are not so much restricted in what they can do, but much is left to their own design. On the other hand, we analyzed another future tool of European legislation, which is the proposed Digital Services Act, which was presented by the Commission in 2020. And what we noticed is that there is a hybrid approach. The DSA identifies various categories of risk, and especially it highlights that there are some very large online platforms which must be regulated with more attention. However, at the same time, much space is given to these very large online platforms to decide how to put in place the measures to protect fundamental rights.
So basically, just to sum up what is the output of this essay, is that on the one hand, we have this risk-based approach spreading across different legislation, just not to mention even the proposal for the Artificial Intelligence Act that has another kind of risk-based approach. And of course, there are questions about what are the future of profiling, looking at these different measures that are a mix between top-down, hybrid, and bottom-up approaches. And so these, of course, raise a lot of questions for the internal market, not just for the user protection fundamental rights, also for the internal market in the EU, for reason of the rule of law and even legal certainty, even for business operators, of course, that have to comply with these multiple sides of, even definition of what could be profiling or what could be a user in different sense. So, but what we think is that even if these policies show some different approaches, there is at least one fil rouge, one common sense in this idea, is that the idea the risk-based approach allows to have a balancing between a fundamental right but also fundamental interest, because risk in this case looks at this fundamental rights approach. So what is interesting is that there's a real reaction of the European Union against the threats we are using in the digital age. We are used to look at the digital age, and this is a call again for the rise of European digital constitutionalism in the internal market. So this is actually our presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I would love to go on with you three to discuss about that. For sure, this is a challenging moment. We have just to write and give regulation and digital structure to our future. But now I would like to give the floor to Elsa and Marco, because we are in a trialing moment. We need to really decide who is the winner. And this is also an award, and I'm also emotional to hear from the jury which are the criteria and why and who is going to win.
Yeah, first of all, let me thank you to you all for the tremendous work you have done. It has been really difficult to decide who is the winner of this year of My Data is Mine award, and in general to choose between all the papers that we received. As Marco Pirani mentioned at the beginning, we established this award to support young researchers like you in the field of data protection and consumers' rights. And after 2 years, I can say honestly, mission accomplished, because the quality of the papers that we receive is very high. And we are going to launch more and more initiatives to support the research. And if in the audience you are interested in having researchers funded by Euroconsumers, follow our site, euroconsumers.org, and follow us, because at the beginning of December, in the occasion of the Euroconsumers Forum, we will launch another really important initiative. So there will be more to come on this field, because we want to support young researchers, we want to enhance consumers' rights. And before giving the floor to my colleague Else, I would like to say that I really appreciate the fact that both of your papers address the issue of the risk-based regulation. Because this is important, because risk-based regulation is at the center of the stage of the regulation process in Europe in this moment, not only in the GDPR, but also in the upcoming DSA, in the Artificial Intelligence Act that you mentioned in your papers, and in the Data Act, that is another piece of legislation that will come into place very soon. So I think this was a really important point, because it's just a technique of regulation that is important to keep in mind. Of course, with different approach. For example, in the paper of Giovanni and Pietro, this approach was more optimistic. Instead, in the paper of Maci, there was more to underline the insufficiency of these criteria in the regulation. But in general, the quality of the paper of these years were really, really high. So congrats once again. And now I leave the floor to my colleague Else to deep dive a little bit in the criteria and the reasoning that we have followed to assign the award this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. I have to say, this year we were treated with some papers of very high quality. I really enjoyed reading them. So also on a personal note, thank you, all of you, for giving us the opportunity. Of course, it's after careful consideration that we ended up with the final two for some very good reasons. We're not going to go into all of the details, but please allow me to maybe highlight a few points. First of all, both papers really chose a topic that is hot at the moment, top of mind. And by that, I do not only mean that it is within the European bubble, because as Marco said, some regulatory frameworks are being prepared as we speak. But above all, because it's so very relevant for consumers. And you will understand that as a consumer organization, this is our main focus. So AI, profiling, algorithms, they're very much present in the day-to-day life of consumers. They offer a lot of benefits, but let's face it, they come with a challenge as well. Now, talking about challenges, and this brings me to the second point, challenging the status quo, asking ourselves, are we still going in the right way? Is it still fit for purpose? It's something that we should all of us should do every day. But in particular for scientists, for researchers, it is very important, and it should be a constant reminder. And I have to say that all three of you really took this at heart. So the question that Marky was questioning was, is the risk-based approach for AI still the most appropriate one? Clearly, you definitely say no, as human rights can never be fully captured by a risk assessment. The paper is very clear on the potential limitations of a risk-based approach. I have to say the concrete solutions and practical implementation still leaves us with a few questions, but maybe we can deep dive on this afterwards. But also, Pietro and Giovanni, you focus on the risk-based approach, but then for legislation, influencing, profiling. Now, what we really liked about your approach is that you don't only focus on the regulation, but more also at the rationale behind it, behind two legal masterpieces, the DSA and the GDPR. They might seem very different at first glance, but taking a step back, not so much. And the interesting thing of looking at it that way is that it gives us really precious insights on how to balance innovation, but also with some core European values. I have to say, when I remember when reading it, that I thought this should be taught in the first grade of every law school. And maybe as a final point, and then I'm wrapping up, what we also very appreciated in both the papers is the focus on future-proofing legislation, which is a concern at Euroconsumers we absolutely share. But of course, unfortunately, there can only be one winner, and I'm not going to keep up the suspense, but have Marco do the honors.
Yeah, I think that we have a prize. Yeah, here it is. So, Marco, I think it's the time for you to assign a winner.
It's my
Yeah.
it's my honor. Okay. So there is a winner. There are two winners. So you have to share this, and it's my congratulations. This is for you.
Thank you.
But we have a second place also, and because the challenge was very high, so we recognize also second place for Maki. And that's, I think, the end of this. I believe we heard a lot of interesting reflection reading that. I want to challenge you maybe to have a little bit something, a debate more elaborated, maybe in December in our annual event. I invite everybody. It will be online, but also in Brussels, and we will go a little bit more in depth on that. We were pirate a little bit. We stolen 5 minutes, but this is in a good tradition of lawyer understanding better how to work in the digital environment. We need to be a little bit pirate, and we will keep on being like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.